The Oyo Empire, once the towering pillar of Yoruba strength, began to stumble in the early years of the 19th century. For centuries, its drums had beaten across the savannah, its cavalry had thundered through the grasslands, and its kings had spoken with voices that carried far beyond their palaces. But empires, like great trees, do not fall in a single day. They weaken slowly, eaten away from within and battered from without. Civil strife tore at Oyo's heart. Old rivalries between chiefs, disobedience among generals, and cracks in loyalty shook the empire's foundation. From the north, Fulani forces pressed down, striking hard at the borders and pouring salt into the wounds of Oyo's weakness. Trade routes that once carried wealth from the coast to the inland markets grew unsafe, and the once proud authority of the Ilorin was no longer obeyed in distant towns. The empire that had commanded fear and respect was now gasping, its shadow shrinking with every passing year. And so, as Oyo's light dimmed, Yorubaland was left without its guiding star. A great vacuum opened, a land rich with warriors, traders, and farmers, but no single hand strong enough to hold them all together. Out of this emptiness rose new powers, each eager to seize a piece of the fallen crown. Ibadan, a city of warriors, hardened by constant battle, grew like a storm cloud on the western horizon. Ijai, fierce and ambitious, stood tall as a rival, its leaders hungering for dominance. The Egba people, settled around Abeokuta, fortified themselves, building walls of stone and spirit to protect their independence. Farther east, the Ekiti kingdoms, proud and resilient, stirred, while the Ijesha people prepared their own path, determined not to bend under the weight of outsiders. The land was alive with ambition and unrest. Yorubaland, once united under Oyo's banner, now became a field of competing fires, each kingdom burning brightly, each one determined to shape its own destiny. And from these embers, the wars that would scar and redefine the Yoruba world began to take form. Ibadan was not born as a royal city of kings, nor did it rise with the blessing of ancient thrones. It began as a refuge, a settlement of warriors, hunters, and survivors who gathered in the hills after Oyo's collapse. But what Ibadan lacked in royal blood, it made up for with steel and courage. In a land where power was slipping like sand through open fingers, Ibadan forged its name on the battlefield. Every season brought the beat of war drums from its walls. Ibadan warriors marched across towns, their ranks disciplined, their weapons sharpened, their strategies feared. Victories piled upon victories, and with each campaign, the city grew stronger. They controlled the roads that carried kola from the north, salt from the coast, and goods that fed the markets of Yorubaland. Whoever wished to trade in peace had to reckon with Ibadan's shadow. Soon, Ibadan was no longer just a city, it became a force, stretching its hand wide across Yorubaland. Smaller towns and kingdoms were made to send tribute, cowries, food, men for war. Resistance was met with fire and iron, obedience with uneasy peace. To Ibadan, this was the way to hold a land together. But to those who bowed unwillingly, it felt like chains upon their necks. Whispers of resentment grew in distant courts. Among the Ekiti, chiefs muttered of Ibadan's arrogance. In Ijeshaland, warriors clenched their fists at the thought of tribute demanded by men they did not call overlords. Even as Ibadan's fame spread, so too did its reputation for domination. In the rolling hills of Ekiti and the thick forests of Ijesha, people lived with pride in their independence. Their fathers had tilled the soil, their mothers had woven cloth and nurtured markets, and their chiefs had ruled without bowing to any foreign crown. But as Ibadan's shadow stretched eastward, their freedom grew heavy with demands. Messengers from Ibadan would arrive with orders, tribute of cowries, food, and warriors for battles that were not theirs to fight. Young men of Ekiti and Ijesha, who should have been guarding their farmlands or learning the ways of their elders, were marched into distant wars, their blood spilled for the glory of a city they did not call home. For every harvest taken, for every levy imposed, resentment tightened like a rope around their throats. In the markets, elders spoke in hushed voices of Ibadan's pride. "Are we not a people of our own?" they asked. Shall the hills of Akiti and the forests of Ijesha bend to men who know nothing of our ways? The tribute, once given with hesitation, began to feel like salt upon an open wound. There were moments of quiet resistance, a delayed payment, a refusal to send soldiers, a cold silence when Ibadan's envoys appeared. But scattered defiance could not break Ibadan's grip. The chiefs and warriors of Akiti and Ijesha soon understood, if they stood alone, they would be crushed one after another. But if they stood together, shoulder to shoulder, their voices would thunder loud enough to shake Ibadan itself. So they began to unite, binding themselves with a common oath. Pride, pain, and hope flowed into one stream, the birth of a banner under which both Akiti and Ijesha would march. It was called the Akiti Parapo, the Confederation of the Akiti, a union forged not by choice alone but by necessity. Under this banner, they would challenge Ibadan's authority and seek to reclaim the freedom that had slipped through their fingers. The oath was more than words, it was the heartbeat of a new beginning. Across the towns of Akiti and deep within the forests of Ijeshaland, drums echoed a call to unity. Chiefs who once eyed one another with suspicion now clasped hands. Warriors who once guarded their own borders now swore to defend each other's soil. This was the dawn of the Akiti Parapo, the Confederation of the Akiti, a gathering of proud towns bound by one mission, to break the yoke of Ibadan. Leaders emerged, men of courage and vision, who spoke with voices that carried both grief and hope. They promised their people that no longer would their sons be dragged into foreign wars, no longer would their harvests be emptied for another city's gain. Under this banner, the Akiti and Ijesha would breathe as free people again. The towns sent their best, hunters who could read the forest like a book, blacksmiths whose iron rang with defiance, and warriors whose feet beat the earth like thunder. When they marched together for the first time, the sight was enough to lift the spirits of the weary, spears gleaming, drums rolling, banners flying in the wind. Their first campaigns carried the weight of a people newly awakened. Outposts once loyal to Ibadan trembled at their advance. Smaller towns who had long endured Ibadan's heavy hand now found courage to resist, seeing strength in the Akiti Parapo's ranks. The Akiti Parapo was no longer just an idea, it was a force. A force born from shared suffering, hardened by unity, and driven by a dream of freedom. Osogbo was more than a town, it was a gate between worlds. Perched on the frontier where Ibadan's reach stretched eastward, it stood like a sentinel guarding the paths that led into the heart of the Yoruba country. For Ibadan, Osogbo was a loyal ally, a bulwark that shielded its influence from the encroaching ambitions of rival powers. Whoever held Osogbo held the key to the roads, the rivers, and the markets that connected west to east. Its walls were not the tallest, nor its markets the richest, but its value lay in its position. Traders passing through carried goods that fed Ibadan's wealth. Messengers and soldiers used its routes as lifelines, keeping Ibadan's authority alive across distant lands. If Osogbo remained firm, Ibadan's power would stand steady. If it fell, Ibadan's influence would crack like clay in the sun. The Akiti Parapo saw this with sharp eyes. To them, Osogbo was not just another town, it was the spine of Ibadan's hold in the region. Strike it, and Ibadan would stagger. Capture it, and the fire of rebellion would roar across Yorubaland. To raise their banner over Osogbo was to show the world that Ibadan was not untouchable. And so, the decision was made. The Akiti Parapo would march on Osogbo, not with the quiet defiance of tribute withheld, but with the thunder of war. Their target was chosen, their spirits high, and their confidence fueled by early victories. For Osogbo, the days of uneasy calm were ending. Its people, caught between loyalty and looming danger, braced themselves for the storm. In the year 1878, the earth shook beneath the march of the Akiti Parapo. From the hills of Akiti and the forests of Ijesha, their warriors poured forth, a river of spears and muskets flowing toward Osogbo. Drums thundered at their rear, horns split the morning air, and their banners rose like flames against the sky. Word spread quickly, Osogbo was their destination, and nothing would turn them back. Inside Osogbo's walls, fear walked hand in hand with determination. The people knew what was coming. Mothers whispered prayers as they gathered their children close. Elders lifted their eyes to the heavens, calling on the gods of their ancestors for protection. Young men sharpened blades until sparks danced in the dark, while the hunters prepared charms and powders to steady their courage. Osogbo had long stood as Ibadan's stronghold, but never before had it faced the storm of such an alliance. The first scouts of the Ekiti Parapo appeared like shadows at the edge of the forest. Then came the camps, fires lit on the hills surrounding the town, watchtowers rising from the earth, warriors encircling the roads like a tightening noose. Day by day, the siege grew heavier. Traders were cut off, food grew scarce, and every path in or out of the town bristled with enemies. At night, the silence was pierced by war chants drifting from the enemy camp, songs that spoke of victory and vengeance. By day, the people of Osogbo looked upon the horizon and saw smoke rising from villages already overrun. The siege was not just a blockade, it was a message that the Ekiti Parapo had come not to threaten, but to claim. Yet within the walls, courage did not wither. Messengers slipped out under cover of darkness, racing to Ibadan with pleas for aid. Warriors swore to defend their town until help arrived, even if it meant their last breath. Osogbo stood like a candle flickering in the wind, its flame small but unyielding, waiting for the storm to break. The drums of war beat like thunder as Ibadan's warriors arrived to break the siege. Their march was swift, their faces set in grim resolve, for they knew Osogbo was more than a town, it was the heart of their frontier. The Ekiti Parapo, emboldened by unity, spread their forces wide, determined to crush Ibadan's pride once and for all. When the two armies clashed, the earth itself seemed to tremble. Muskets roared, their smoke rolling across the fields like storm clouds. Arrows hissed through the air, spears struck shields, and the shouts of warriors rose high above the chaos. The beat of talking drums mingled with the crack of gunfire, turning the battlefield into a living storm. Hand met hand, blade struck blade. Warriors wrestled in the dust, their cries fierce and desperate. The river Oba, flowing near the battleground, became both witness and grave. In the frenzy, many were driven back into its waters, their armor dragging them under, their voices silenced by the flood. It was this drowning, so sudden, so terrible, that etched the name Jalumi, meaning the people were drowned, into the memory of the war. Still the fight raged on. Both sides fought with the fire of survival, their banners rising and falling as the day dragged into blood-soaked hours. At last, the discipline and sheer ferocity of the Ibadan army began to turn the tide. Their warriors pressed harder, their lines refusing to break, and slowly the Ekiti Parapo were driven back. By the battle's end, the siege was broken. Osogbo's walls still stood, scarred but unfallen. The Ekiti Parapo, battered and bleeding, retreated into the forests, their hopes dimmed but not destroyed. For Ibadan, it was a victory hard won, a triumph purchased with rivers of blood. Both armies counted their dead, and the fields of Osogbo bore the weight of sacrifice. Yet within Osogbo, relief spread like fresh rain after drought. The people rejoiced that their town had survived, their gratitude for Ibadan etched into song and story. For Ibadan itself, the victory restored its prestige, a reminder that it still held the sword of power in Yorubaland. But though the Jalumi War ended in Ibadan's favor, the embers of rebellion were not extinguished. The Ekiti Parapo had tasted unity, and even in defeat, their resolve smoldered, ready to burn again. Though the fields of Osogbo were stained with the blood of victory, the war was far from over. The Jalumi battle had broken the siege, but it had not broken the will of the Ekiti Parapo. Defeat only sharpened their determination. In the hills and forests, their leaders regrouped, their banners lifted once more. They called upon more allies, drawing strength from towns that shared their resentment of Ibadan's dominance. The wound left by Jalumi deepened the divisions across Yorubaland. Ibadan, though triumphant, had spent dearly in men and resources. The Ekiti Parapo, though beaten back, had proven that unity gave them power, and unity could be rebuilt. From this realization rose the longest and fiercest struggle Yorubaland would ever witness, the Kiriji War, which raged from 1877 to 1893. Jalumi was but a chapter in that greater fire, a spark that fed the flames of nearly 2 decades of unrelenting conflict. And yet, even amid the ashes of war, memory carved its mark. The Osogbo War, remembered as Jalumi, became a tale carried on the tongues of generations. Elders spoke of the courage of warriors who fought with spears and muskets, of mothers who prayed as the walls trembled, of the tragedy of men swallowed by the river Oba. Both sides bore scars, and both sides carried stories of sacrifice. Its lessons lived on, that disunity could turn brothers into enemies, that ambition without balance could set a land aflame, and that courage, though noble, often came with a heavy price. Jalumi reminded the Yoruba people that strength without unity breeds endless strife, but unity, even fragile, could challenge the mightiest of powers. Today, the name Jalumi still echoes, not as a mere memory of drowning, but as a symbol of resilience, a warning against division and a reminder of the cost of freedom. The War of Osogbo is not only a tale of blood and iron, it is a mirror held up to history, showing both the glory and the grief of a people who struggled to shape their destiny.